Now, if you're sad, depressed, having a crisis, or feel a lack of purpose, in this video I'm going to talk about why that is the case, especially because I've been through that specific situation, and it all tangles to one specific topic, the idea of identity. Now, if you're experiencing the symptoms I just described, you're probably experiencing something known as an identity crisis, or in other words, specific variances that would lead perhaps up to this. And so I'm going to explain to you guys 5 specific principles that are absolutely important when it comes to identity. And once you know these 5 principles, I can almost guarantee you that you will perhaps not figure out your identity right away, but you can at least prepare yourself for the absolute catastrophe that you guys will probably face. And now, without further ado, let's literally jump straight to it. Tabula rasa, you guys have probably learned this if you're taking philosophy or even psychology. So a lot of people have probably learned about this in university and even in high school. And so the idea of tabula rasa by John Locke is quite simple, or in other words, very simple. And it's the idea of when you were born, you basically have nothing. Like literally you're a blank slate. That's what it translates in Latin. And so when you're born, you were born with specific circumstances, of course. Like for example, you can be born to a rich family or poor family. But in other words, the specific belief systems that you have created for yourself isn't really given to you, right? And your entire belief system includes specific value systems, your idea of money, your perception of education, your specific beliefs and opinions, and even emotional control to some extent. So tabula rasa you have to understand, because from now on I want you to get that when you are born, you don't have a specific understanding of how the world works. Instead, a lot of the things that you do learn early on is pretty much preconditioned. Like you are basically, I would say, in the early years of development, right? Let's say from your ages of 0 to, let's say, 18 years old. And Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, right? The idea of us humans having literally the longest dependency towards our parents throughout all animal kingdoms, and that's obviously 18 years, but it can vary. Some people obviously stick around a little bit more, some people even less. But the idea is that for the majority of your life, between the ages of 0 to 18 years, a lot of the stuff that is programmed or hardwired into your brain mainly comes from your surroundings. Now that includes, your social norms. So that might include, values from society, the religion you grew up, your parents, the way you were raised, the friends, the early education you had early on. So mainly 0 to 18 years old, right? You're already preconditioned. In other words, you're already pre-learned on a few sets of principles that will hopefully be beneficial when you carry out towards the rest of your life. Let's say you live to 100 years. And so, by the way, if you would want to become, an entrepreneur, a millionaire, a lot of people say this, that let's say you were preconditioned from 0 to 18 years old, and you want to be a millionaire, right? So then that phase from 18 to 100 years, what you are doing essentially is unlearning, right? And so I'll probably make another video about that, but the reason is because a lot of the stuff that you get learned from 0 to 18 years of age, especially in terms of business and money and specific feelings of negotiation, etc., a lot of that stuff is quite generic and should suit or fulfill the majority of society, but it isn't what's going to make you essentially a millionaire, in other words, an entrepreneur. Now that is perhaps for a different video, but I want you guys to understand that for now, a lot of the stuff that, when it comes to your specific identity is preconditioned, especially when it comes to 0 to 18 years, and everything after that is basically what you learn, obviously from the years after. And so this idea of your preconditioned mindset, your preconditioned setting, is basically an understanding of your belief system. And so belief system is a complex foundational principle of specific value propositions what you have for yourself. Now, let me keep it a little bit simple. In other words, the way you believe and understand things is basically your belief system. And your belief system is preconditioned, specifically until 18 years old. And everything after that is either unlearned, as I mentioned earlier, or just like add on top of that, right? And so that is basically tabula rasa from John Locke. The second thing, what I want you guys to understand is existence precedes essence. And this is from Sartre, or Sartre, if I pronounce his name properly. And essentially both of them talk about the same thing, right? They talk about that your identity literally, when you were born, comes from nothing, right? And so existence precedes essence means, from Sartre's perspective, is that your identity is essentially created. It's not given to you, it's essentially created. And so the way you live and conduct and navigate throughout this chaos of a world we live in is essentially of what you make out of it, right? Your specific actions, your careers, you know, the type of person you want to be, the visions you have. So essentially your existence is crafted through the makings and actions of you do within your own reality, right? If that makes sense. So in other words, both of them are quite equivalent. The third is shadow, and this is a very interesting, this is from Carl Jung. And Carl Jung talks about a specific personality architecture known as your shadow, right? And so your shadow, you have to imagine, and I don't want to elaborate a little bit, I don't want to elaborate too much on this because it does go a little bit deep and uncomfortable and a little bit scary. But basically the shadow is known as your deep type of personality that exists within you, right? And so everybody has a shadow. Everybody has a deep personality. Unfortunately, according to Carl Jung, a lot of people might, you know, either not understand, one, the shadow, their inner self, or number two, a lot of people leverage or take on, you know, specific bad characteristics of your shadow. Now, a lot of people think that shadow is, you know, your deep, dark, mysterious personality of yourself. But your shadow has a lot of good characteristics as well. But a lot of people, with the point I was trying to make earlier is, a lot of people utilize more of their dark areas of their shadow and basically become a criminal or drug addict or alcoholic or all these other types of bad personalities that you can see nowadays. And that's essentially because they, in other words, let the shadow control themselves. So I believe the key word here is to control your mind, right? Or in other words, essentially controlling the shadow. Because you have to understand, and I believe Andrew Tate said it a lot, is that your mind is perhaps the only thing you can control in this universe, right? So that includes your belief systems, your perception, your understanding of reality. And it can't be even more true, because it's literally the only thing you can control, right? And that includes your shadow. So if you understand, one, your shadow, who your deep personalities are, and you can figure out what your shadow is, because I've literally done the same. I've done it through a specific questionnaire. I can give it to you guys if you want it as well, so you can figure out the type of shadow you are. But what's more important is, once you understand what and who your shadow is, the next step is to actually integrate, and I'm specifically highlighting integrate your shadow into your current personality. And now, a lot of people believe, when they first read Carl Jung, honestly, I've understood it the same way, that your shadow is like your villain towards your current personality. But Carl Jung said it himself, the importance is to understand your shadow and allow your shadow to be part of your current personality. So in other words, you shouldn't, one, let your shadow just fully take over you, because otherwise you'll become, as I mentioned earlier, criminal or drug addict and all of these other bad actors. But you should rather integrate your shadow into the personality that you are, so that you can basically optimize into the best version of who you essentially are. And now, again, if you want to figure out your shadow, just write in the comments. I'll send it to you for free so you can understand it. And yes, so that's Shadow Carl Jung. Number 4, stages of identity. Now this is very interesting. This is from Erik Erikson. Cool name, by the way. But he basically talks about the topic of progress, in other words, development, right? And a lot of people, when they talk about identity, they think it's something that is static, right? Something that never essentially changes, never, you know, you're just one personality entire life. But according to his theory, that's not really the case. Your identity progresses. And so if you're, you know, unsure about your identity right now, don't worry, because it's not static. It's something that grows and progresses over time. And so Stages of identity, right? There are multiple stages of who you can basically become in your life, and the truth is, and I don't honestly know, but I personally think about it, is you probably won't ever find, and this is perhaps quite deep, you won't ever find a specific identity that ties to you, especially until you die, even until you die, because according to his theory, you just keep on progressing, keep on becoming better, and through this idea of progress and development, you will understand that identity, especially people having identity crisis, is something that will go away if you do the necessary changes. Okay? Next, cognitive dissonance. Now this is very interesting because this is quite similar to Carl Jung's shadow, more or less. Let me explain in just a minute. Also, I do apologize for this marker. But cognitive dissonance basically explains that if you are doing something that is not according to, if you're not doing something that's according to your personality, your brain just goes haywire, right? So imagine, like, it's a very basic example. Let's say you're an absolute extrovert, attention-seeking person, right? As a shadow, so as a deep personality, and you suddenly like do the complete opposite, right? I don't know, you isolate yourself in a room, you try to become an introvert, you try to, I don't know, just hide yourself from the world. Like, according to his theory, your brain will basically have a war, and I quote, war with itself. So in other words, your brain won't really process it that well, and so there's going to be a lot of contradiction with yourself on a psychological level as well. And so the idea of cognitive dissonance is the keyword to actually do stuff that is according to your personality. And now that could range from a variety of things, from, you know, simple daily stuff like, I don't know, the way you talk to somebody, all the way to actually choosing your career path, right? And so if I've realized the same, and I've done the same, once I understood my shadow, essentially my deep personality of who I am, I kind of researched or discovered, you know, okay, what are the types of jobs or occupations that would suit me, or me as in my shadow specifically, and then I realized that my brain is just 100 times more effective. Okay, 100 is probably an exaggeration here, but you get the point. It's more effective when you work on something that matches who you truly are. Logically, that makes sense. And if you want to figure out, you know, specific jobs, occupations that are related to, you know, your personality, I did the Q&A myself, and I can provide it to you as well. So if you are, you know, for example, job seeking and you want to find a job that's according to your personality, just let me know. I'll send you the same quiz that I did for me as well. Next, preconditions below. Last but not least, let's talk about cognitive oh wait, hang on. We got all the topics. Right, so based on these 5 principles, guys, I hope that, and girls, I hope that the idea of identity is more clear, at least more from a psychological, if not philosophical level. And so I can almost guarantee you that if you understand identity and at least try to improve or, you know, like make this part of your life better, like almost certainly you'll become less depressed. And now, it's mainly because I've done this and I've experienced it myself, and once I understood all of this, I was genuinely just more happier. And of course, there's always midlife crisis here and there, but at the end of the day, it's identity that is, you know, a very strong foundational marker of what you want to do in this life. And so incorporating this, you know, as a specific principle for, you know, doing anything is one effective way of accomplishing whatever you want to do. So with that being said, I hope you guys understood.